This story happened many years ago when I was a young man, living out in the Northwest. In those times, I was spending my summers working odd jobs to help pay for college. I would hitchhike occasionally, not daily or anything like that, but from time to time I would use it to get from one city to another. There was one night, though, that made me stop hitchhiking forever. I would say it was probably my 5th time or so hitchhiking. I needed to get to a city about 30 minutes away and didn't have a car. I couldn't figure out if a bus was going to come through anytime soon, so I decided to stand near the side of the road and wait for a car. Several cars passed me by until finally there was a car that I saw slow down and then stop next to me. It was a gray car and the driver already had all his windows down. He leaned his head over to the side of the passenger's window and said hi to me. He didn't seem too friendly, but he asked me where I was going. I told the man, and then he told me to hop in and motioned to the back seat. Based on the couple of words that we said to each other, the guy didn't seem very nice, but I had to make a split-second decision, and I elected to get inside the car. I got in the back and immediately noticed that the man had a type of barrier set up between the front and back seats of the car so that when you were sitting in the back, you really couldn't see anything in the front. This made me regret my decision, but literally as soon as I was inside, the man began driving. I couldn't see him or anything, and now I had just hoped that he wasn't a total creep. His windows were all down in the car, and as we started driving at a decent speed, he rolled them up. When he did, I saw that they were all painted black, so I couldn't see out of them at all. Now I felt like I was in trouble. I tried to roll my window back down, but the button next to my seat didn't do anything. I called out to the man telling him that I didn't want to ride anymore, but I didn't hear anything from him. I knocked on the barrier, which appeared to be very solid, and asked the man if he could hear me. I got no response, and the more we drove, the more worried I became. I was basically just sitting there in a box, not being able to see anything. I tried the door as well, but of course it was locked. I didn't know what more I could do, other than just sit there and wonder where we were going. He drove for what felt like a really long time. I don't know exactly how long it actually was, but if I had to guess, it was probably about 30 minutes. At last, I felt the car slowing down and then finally come to a stop. I heard the doors all unlock and then heard the driver's door open. The man started walking away and I decided to open up my door and look outside. I slowly opened it up. I saw outside that there was some sort of dirt road, but it appeared to almost be like a driveway of some sort. I looked around. It was very silent other than the distant sound of crickets in the night. I wondered where I was and where the man had gone. I didn't hear any cars or see any lights to indicate buildings. As I looked outside further, there appeared to be just a woods and a dirt pavement that we were on. I stepped outside the car to see a grass field with a little shed in the distance, but it didn't really seem like anybody would be inside there. Then I suddenly heard footsteps coming from another direction behind the car. I took off and ran into the woods. I didn't stop running and had so much adrenaline that I probably ran for 10 minutes straight in the woods. I was terrified, but after I got too tired to keep running, I slowed down and didn't hear any noises. I had no idea where I was or how to get to safety. I kept on walking through the woods in the same direction, and eventually, I made it to a road. This road was paved and not dirt. I figured I could follow it to get to some sort of town, or at least a gas station or something. The road was quiet, and I began walking on it for maybe 10 minutes before hearing a car in the distance. Then I saw the car start to come around the corner. I feared it was the same man, and ran back into the woods, until I noticed that it was actually a police car. I then ran out of the woods onto the street. The car saw me, and then I saw the flashing lights turn on. I then ran to the officer, who got out of the car and asked me what I was doing. I told him what had happened, and he was able to drive me to a nearby town. I stayed there for the night, and then decided to just wait for a bus and not hitchhike again. I went hiking in the woods outside of town by myself once. I didn't know the area well and no one went with me, but I thought it would be okay as long as I stayed on the trail that was supposed to bring me back to where I started. I didn't plan on camping overnight, so I only brought a light pack with me. Not surprisingly, after getting distracted by the scenery, I got lost. I expected to finish the 5-mile loop in about 2 hours, but after 4 hours I was still in the woods. I didn't pay close enough attention to the trails on the map when I started, so the trail markers didn't help me figure out where I was at all. I tried to look for help on my phone, but I didn't have any service and the GPS was glitching out and didn't give me an exact location. I kept going, trying to stay calm, until 6 hours had passed and I realized I hadn't seen a trail marker in miles. Then I knew I was really lost, and panic started to set in as darkness was falling. I used my phone too much, trying to get a signal or a map, so before I knew it, the battery was almost dead. The last thing it told me was that there was a road a couple miles north of my location. The only things I brought that actually helped were a flashlight and a compass, and I used these to make my way through the brush and bramble in the dark until I finally came out to the clearing of the highway, over 8 hours since I started my hike. I was overcome with relief, but I knew I wasn't out of the woods yet, figuratively speaking. I tried to humor myself by saying my hike could just turn into a hitchhike. It was pitch black, except for the stars and the quarter moon, which was mostly covered by the trees. It took 10 minutes before the first car came down the deserted 2-lane highway, but despite my thumb sticking out, they drove right past me. Another 10 minutes later, a truck came past and they thankfully stopped. It was a beat-up old pickup driven by a crusty countryman, but I was glad just to see another face. He asked me where I was going and I told him to take me back to the trailhead. He agreed, and I climbed in. One of the first things I noticed was the shotgun sticking out from the cushions of the driver's seat, but I didn't worry about it too much, as I figured most people who lived in the area were always armed. Other than that, my biggest worry was the stench of liquor on his breath, which was very clearly affecting his ability to drive. On the way there, we made small talk and traded names. I gave him a fake name Jack, and he gave me a name Jonah, which I also suspected was fake. He was a local, and I was a tourist. He worked in a lumber mill, and I worked from home for an advertising company. He had a family. I was single. He was a jack of all trades, and I was new to hiking and had gotten lost. I trusted that he knew where we were going because I had no idea. Everything just looked the same. Just one endless stretch of unlit country road flanked by towering trees. I didn't even question him when we turned down the gravel driveway. It felt like years since I had last been to the trailhead, and I had no idea if the entrance was a paved road, a gravel road, or a dirt road. All of a sudden, Jonah started saying some strange things. "You know," he said, "my family don't have TV or Wi-Fi or any of that stuff. It's kind of hard to find ways of entertaining yourself out here, but sometimes a whole truckload of fun just falls into your lap." "What do you mean?" I asked, confused. Jonah paused. In the same moment, we came around a bend of the driveway, and my heart jumped into my throat as I saw something that was definitely not the trailhead. Jonah had taken me to his house, which was nothing more than a single wide trailer. Inside there was a light on. As the headlights hit the side of the trailer, a woman and an adolescent child came to the window and pulled open the blinds. Their eyes were sunken in, and their expressions were empty and haunting. "That's my family," said Jonah. "They'll be happy to meet you after they greet you, of course." A laugh escaped his lips as if he was proud of some awful and corny joke he just made. "What's going on?" I shouted. "Why did you take me here?" Jonah put his truck in park and then turned to me and smiled. "You're going to entertain my family for a few days, or as long as you last." Every alarm in my body went off as I turned around and tried to escape from the truck, but the door refused to open. "That's the good old child lock right there," Jonah said, laughing. I turned around to yell at him, but instead I found myself staring down the barrel of a shotgun. "You better do as I say, boy," Jonah grumbled quietly. "I just might as well shoot you right now and have my wife throw you in the stew for the next couple of months. Now get out." Jonah stepped out of the driver's seat and ordered me to climb over the console and follow him out. I did as I was told, and then I was commanded to walk toward the house, while Jonah held the shotgun at my back a few feet behind me. I walked as slow as Jonah would allow as I thought through all my options. I knew that if I entered that house, I was probably as good as dead, so I took my chances. Without warning, I jumped to the left and broke out into a full sprint towards the woods. Seconds later, Jonah fired the shotgun. The sound was deafening, but in the same instant, fiery hot pinpricks of pain shot through my flesh all over the right side of my body. Behind me, I heard Jonah swearing, "God damn, third shot, you lucky bastard." I kept running despite the pain, knowing I had to get away as far as possible before considering any other part of my situation. Whether I bled out and got even more lost. Adrenaline kept me going for several minutes until the pain and exhaustion forced me to stop and take a look at what just happened to me. My luck was incredible. If that psycho wasn't drunk and slow, he would have hit me much sooner and much closer, and probably wouldn't have missed me as much. Also, if he had loaded something else into the shotgun, I probably would have been shredded. I kept going through the woods until, by another stroke of luck, I came out on someone else's property. I knocked on their door and begged them for help. Ironically, they answered the door with a shotgun, but still decided to help me out. After many more hours of pain and bleeding, I finally made it to a hospital. All of my vital organs were spared, thanks in part to my backpack, but a number of those pellets were embedded deep into my flesh and couldn't even be retrieved. I came pretty close to dying that night, and if I had to spend any more time lost in the woods afterwards, I'm sure I would have. Needless to say, I don't go hiking anymore, and I stick to what I've been good at since high school, which is running track. I was stuck in Birmingham trying to get across the border to Atlanta, which is difficult without a car. I couldn't afford to take the bus either. I walked around downtown in the party district, where all the bars and clubs were busy, asking everyone who would give me the time of day if they were headed to Atlanta and could take a passenger. It's a hard process, and almost nobody ever wants to do it, but I knew from experience that I could find the right person if I was persistent. I started at noon, in hopes that I could find somebody to give me a ride before everyone in the area was bound to stay in the city for the night. It was almost 4 o'clock when I stepped into the country-themed whiskey bar and found 2 men at the bar who looked promising. I approached them and asked my question. At first, they didn't really seem like they even wanted to acknowledge my existence, but after they whispered something to each other, they opened up. They said they were line workers and they happened to be traveling to Atlanta for some work the next day. They were planning on leaving at 5 o'clock. I said that's great, and since I couldn't afford a drink, I waited outside until they came out. We walked to their van together, and they told me to find a place to sit in the back. There weren't any actual seats, and it was full of tools, but I made do. They weren't very talkative despite my efforts to get some conversation going. They seemed bitter about something, but wouldn't tell me what it was. Eventually, they just told me to shut up, and I did. I couldn't see very well from the back of the van, but I knew we were heading vaguely in the direction of Atlanta. However, we were only half an hour out of the city when they pulled off the highway, claiming to stop for gas. They didn't pull into any of the stations at the exit, though. I bit my tongue to avoid annoying them, but I was dying to ask where the hell we were going. With every minute that passed, things started to get sketchier and sketchier. We turned off the main road and traveled down a country highway. Then we turned onto a dirt road. Finally, I spoke up and said I knew they weren't going to Atlanta, and that's when they stopped. Without saying a word, they both got out and came around to the back, then opened the doors and yanked me out. All of a sudden, I was getting beat on. They spat on me and called me every slur in the book. Then they ripped off all my clothes and took everything I had, which wasn't much, and then they threw me into a ditch. They packed up everything they took from me and left me in the dust. In a matter of minutes, I was reduced to a naked man without a clue where I was and not a thing to my name. All I could do was follow the cloud of dust until I got back to civilization, where I was immediately arrested for public nudity. It was all right, though. It's not the first time I've been arrested by any means, and even though I hadn't made it to my destination, I had managed to find shelter before it got dark. As for the men that got me like that, I don't have any way of getting them to answer for what they did. It's not like, if I had their full names and addresses, it would have made a difference anyway. Men like that grow up thinking they can do whatever they want to a poor black man. And in Alabama, they're not wrong. They could have easily killed me, and it's likely my body would have never have been found. After getting released from jail a few weeks later, I had to start all over again. I lived in Birmingham for another 3 months, before I managed to get myself fully clothed and fed, and saved up enough cash to get a bus ticket. because Lord knows I'm never asking for rides in Birmingham ever again.